Thank you for
Okay.
joining us for this webinar. I'm going to have our guest, Will MacNamara, say the nice things he was just saying before we started recording about how international this challenge is. Will, take it away.
Yeah, no, I well to repeat what I said 15 seconds ago, I'm just looking at this graphic for the first time about the carbon removal challenge, and I'm really surprised in a happy way that it's just so international. So I was asking you guys how intentional it was that you have such a global distribution, because one thing I've noticed, and not just in carbon removal, but in climate tech in general, is that everyone agrees this is a common problem with a common solution. But that means that almost never do you see a distribution of solutions as global as this is.
Yeah, we're really proud of the distribution. We got a good distribution last year, but I think we've improved it even more this year. Partially thanks to my co-chair Thushara, who's putting a lot of work and just looking for universities around the world that might be interested in participating and reaching out to them and trying to get them to some of the teams. We also went to COP, and basically any university that was there working on climate change, we tried to recruit them to participate in the challenge. So this challenge is really growing, and we're really happy with the international nature of it. And hopefully that will continue on to the future and continue on with our finalists that we're going to announce very soon who this year's finalist teams are. But with that said, first I would like to thank everybody for joining us. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, just say hi and where you're from in the chat. I'll get it started. I'm going to say, hi, I'm Matt from NYC, home of the Carbon Removal Challenge Finalist Showcase, which will be at Carbon Unbound this year. So yeah, if the audience members want to post in the chat, please do where you're from visiting us for this webinar. And Duncan, I'm going to turn it over to you uh,
Cool.
to
Okay.
start the webinar, and I'll take off this graphic and turn my camera off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for joining us, Will, for this fifth webinar for the second Open Air Carbon Removal Student Challenge. I always mention it as a student challenge because that's who we're opening this challenge up to. And it's very cool. We're in the final stages of choosing the finalists. And as you saw from that graphic, we've got a pretty wide geographic distribution. Very, very keen to have student teams from the Global South. It's always nice to see people working on this truly planetary problem in a planetary way. So just a few words. That was the words about the carbon challenge, just a few words about you. And then we're just going to basically jump right into a conversation, and we'll get into what you do and why you do it and all that. So Will is a fellow climate communications person. I say fellow because I'm in that as well. He runs communication and marketing consultancy focused on climate technology. His research is at Cambridge University, where he's getting a mid-careers master's, is focused on how to facilitate trust in novel CDR through coordinated communications. This session will be a discussion of his findings so far. Will's career is split between being a reporter for the Financial Times, where he wrote and edited for very many years, and running a communications at both tech startups and biodiversity not-for-profits. He named his company Gibbon after a primate that he is very interested in supporting and that wakes him up every morning from his home near the London Zoo.
True story.
So,
Woken up every day by Gibbon. Sorry,
okay,
go on.
okay, no, that's cool. So let's start with that. So you're coming to us from London, UK, and why are you in London? And just talk to us a little bit about basically your communications experience so far, and maybe we could lead into what you're doing at Cambridge. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so the key point in that wonderful introduction is that I am not an academic. In the course of this research at Cambridge, I have maybe spoken to more academics than at any point in my career. But I have loved this program because it has allowed me as like a former writer and a climate technology communications practitioner to really give myself the space to go in with academic depth and rigor to a topic that is not simple and that actually like rewards months and months and months of quite deep work and understanding. And that's what's been great about it. I sort of, all of my career to date has been in like applied communications, usually under a deadline, like to meet a sort of a purpose. And I got really interested in carbon removal, full stop, and then how to communicate it, because as I'm sure we'll discuss in detail, it's in a lot of ways like the most fascinating and difficult communications challenge I've ever seen, and that seemed worthy of a sort of master's breakout from a career to address. Why I live in London, I don't know. I'm here 20 years later. I'm an American from Texas. You know, a home state of oil and gas in the United States. At the FT, my main beat back in the day was natural resources. I covered oil and gas and mining companies. Just as a personal aside, that's what got me interested in climate and environmental topics. Is starting through the lens of sort of environmental disasters that huge multinational corporations were often responsible for, and sort of getting under the skin of what that looked like and where the responsibility was. So that has been my long and winding road into climate that has recently taken me to CDR.
So cool. Thank you for setting that up and giving us some background. So let's jump right into the meat of it, and maybe I'll kind of like set up a really big picture. So we're in this call because we're all interested in carbon dioxide removal, aka CDR, and we tend to think of supply side, the thing that the carbon removal challenge is set up for, people to build technology that will provide a solution to this problem. And then we think there's the buyers, people who will buy that technology. But in that equation, there's the communicators. And I do believe that communications is an intrinsic part to this whole system. Can we talk a little bit about what are your views on the degree of importance of communicating carbon dioxide removal?
It could not be more important. And I'm still enough of an outsider in corporate communications, coming from a very like skeptical journalistic background, that I think there are areas of industry where like comms, if you think about it just as PR, is a vanity project and it is not necessary. And then there are areas where it is central to the whole thing, where perceptions are unformed and where information is low. And this is one of those. In fact, it is maybe the most extreme case of that I've ever seen. Communications is not a peripheral issue here. If you think about it as encompassing positioning and public perceptions, it's essential. Now, part of that is that whatever you communicate in the whole world like needs to be true and authentic. And that is where CDR has another really fascinating thing going for it, is that very little needs to be spun or misrepresented. Once you peel one layer of the onion, you get to this amazing world-solving set of solutions. Then once you peel the next couple layers, you just get to more and more profound, like world-influencing solutions. It is fundamentally an amazing thing, where the communications to date is in a lot of ways its own worst enemy. And we can talk about why and so on. But I guess just to take a step back, I alighted on this topic so the topic, for the record, as you said in that brilliant introduction, was how to facilitate trust and carbon dioxide removal, CDR, through coordinated communications. In my research, I go in a lot to why coordinated communication is important. But I first got into this really in response to attending industry events. And I think a lot of people in attendance now have been at these too, because it's still a quite small world, isn't it? And it seemed like so many people from different corners of the industry were on stages admitting that there was a trust deficit. Like there's not enough trust. People don't trust carbon removal. And it's like, interesting. Wow, it's quite a profound sort of statement. I mean, that's fundamental. And then they would say, often in the same breath, that there wasn't good storytelling, that communications were a problem. And to differing degrees, and neither idea, like about the problems of trust or communications, was there like an easy solution. It was a bit like all of these sector leaders were just saying, like, yeah, well, that's a huge issue that needs to be worked on. And so I sort of thought, well, that's my work cut out for me. I mean, like, what could be more important? And then, as I'm sure a lot of people will sympathize with, when I started trying to address this, is when you immediately start to realize why it's so difficult to have a simple solution to this, because you very quickly lose the plot on what you're even talking about, right? Like, what is carbon dioxide removal? Like, where are the boundaries? Is this 20 different things? Is like ocean alkalinity enhancement over here and then like biochar is over there? Or because they're all described under the same umbrella, is it one thing with different characteristics, right? And like where are the boundary zones? And therefore, like if you're unclear about what's exactly in this and what's outside of it, how can you begin to start communicating it, much less trust it, right? If someone says to you, do you trust those 20 people over there? And you're like, well, what? I don't know. I know one of them. I can't trust those 20 people. And then imagine if someone said, well, the 19 people you don't know are a lot like the person you do know. Like, that doesn't give you much more to work with either. So this idea of fundamentally what should be considered or positioned as CDR, and outside of it is where I focused a lot of my research. The other thing I think it's really important just to introduce is that to understand where the industry is at the moment in terms of public perceptions. I quickly learned that like two things are true at the same time that are in tension with each other. One is that the like carbon credits markets on which CDR depends has a terrible reputation, right? Like, fact number one, in beginning to think about how to communicate the new wave of CDR, mostly unfairly, like we can go into the reasons why, I think quite unfairly, it is in a quite complicated marketplace that is defined by mistrust, and a lot of corners of it is pretty toxic. And this is because of various carbon accounting scandals and legacy issues with a marketplace that, as you know, is mostly unregulated. So that's one thing. Like, if you were a brander looking at CDR, you'd think, oh, problematic. Like, it's sort of on the edge of a space that is has reputational issues. The second point, though, is that very few people are even aware of the marketplace or the whole space, right? In fact, the numbers are shocking, or they shocked me. In the last comprehensive study done on this, less than 10% of participants in the UK and the US, far less than 10%, had ever heard of carbon dioxide removal or a sample of sub-technologies that were shared there, like enhanced weathering and direct air capture and bio oil and so on. Just sort of no awareness. There's only a little bit more awareness of like carbon credits as a concept, or carbon markets as an infrastructure. So I think what this all implies is that there are at least two priorities kind of driving how to communicate CDR. One is recognizing that it's a game of creating first impressions, right? Like, let's just assume that circa 90% of the people in the world have never heard of this stuff. That's an incredible opportunity, right? We are all in the 10% that have. In fact, we're like the absolute central node of the bullseye of the 10% who have heard about CDR, and probably like to our detriment because we can't quite think outside that box. Only a very secondary goal, I think, is to go back to the group that knows about it and might mistrust it and try to present a truthful, different narrative about why the new wave of CDR is different and how it's more trustworthy. But the prize, in my mind, is to intersect with people who are hearing about this incredibly exciting space for the first time, and with the right blend of facts and storytelling, present a picture of it that is as interesting and appealing as it actually is in reality. So yeah,
Okay.
there's so many ways I could go here because the research had so many different elements to it. But
Yeah.
yeah, where do you want to take it?
That's awesome. Well, no, thank you. You took it in so many, you actually said so much there and answered so many of my anticipated questions. So I'm like, what do I ask him about now? But no, there's a lot to be said about it. So I just want to kind of like circle back on some of the things you said and maybe bring a little bit more light to some of the topics you talked about, just so that all audiences are so we can unpack a couple of things so all audience members get it. So the carbon removal challenge is a challenge that's set up for suppliers.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that trust levels are bad as a result of little awareness, also a couple of toxic practices that took place in what we called carbon crediting or carbon removal 1.0 or previous carbon crediting programs.
Mhm.
Is this so? This is bad, obviously, because it affects them. They're coming up with carbon removal technologies and they're going to come to marketplace and people will be like, well, hey, it went pretty rotten last time. Why the hell should I trust you now? And I think back to our something that our very generous sponsor, Peter Reinhardt, said. So the Carbon Removal Challenge is presented by Peter and Erica Reinhardt. If you're listening, Peter, thank you very much once again for that. But we did a webinar with him, and he uses this really great metaphor that I'll circle back to, is that carbon removal is not something that shows up in the back of a truck and is unloaded at a loading dock. It is fundamentally invisible. So therein lies the core problem. Like how can we trust something that cannot be actually properly monitored and verified? Is that a way forward? Like, should we double down on monitoring, verification, reporting and verification, or is it bigger than that?
Both are true. So yes, obviously, 100% of this whole sector agrees there should be a doubling and tripling down of MRV. I think the more interesting point for this audience especially is to start with is that there is a face, I think, of this invisible gas and this highly abstract process for removing something you never could see in the first place. And that is literally the faces of the founders of the new wave of technologies, right? And that makes intuitive sense, but just as a thought experiment, think about what's happening with EVs. So this is a market where it's not the technology of the lithium ion batteries and its technicalities, nor is it like the financiers to the auto industry, nor is it like the marketplaces where EVs are traded that is the face of the promise and the pitfalls of the industry. It's Tesla, right? And it's actually sometimes literally Elon Musk and his Chinese competitors. And there's a real insight here. In CDR, it's much more abstract, right? But that means theoretically that there's going to be a much more of a human impulse to find a face for something that is invisible. And to date, if we talk about, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of taxonomy, but if we think about, call it novel CDR as encompassing everything from like nature-based, semi-nature-based solutions like biochar to hyper technological ones like DAC, basically all of the new wave of technologies that have only kind of come to fruition since the Biden climate bills have been passed. All of those are just now, and even more in the next 6 to 12 months, proving those pilot projects, having something to show for themselves, and having companies that therefore have a bigger seat at the table of climate solutions and have founders who are telling the story of not just their esoteric technology, but how it fits in to a bigger story. So I think the suppliers of tomorrow who are part of this challenge are the central players in communications. And that's what that is where a lot of my analysis and recommendations focused on in my paper. Because it's also true that of all sides of the space, they're the least coordinated. That's for a couple reasons. The space itself is incredibly fragmented. I, for one, have never seen anything under a so-called industry grouping that is more diverse. Like, how can we possibly expect, someone interested in, ocean carbon to have like an instinctive connection with someone who's in DAC, right? And the fundamental fragmentation of the industry, compounded by just how small and like micro startup everyone is, has meant that the supply side just like this bunch of startups who are sort of pioneering tomorrow, in my sort of experience, don't really talk to each other much. They are focused on survival and scale up, but they absolutely need to. And I think it is super important for future suppliers to be aware of all they have in common and to be talking about that now in the present before they start scaling up. Because what that'll mean is in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, when there's an exponential curve of the general public and non-CDR buyers kind of being aware of this space, what it will mean is that whatever point you enter the space from whatever subsector or pathway within CDR, you are getting a different flavor of the same story. For instance, that pathway X, led by amazing company Y, believes in measurement, to your point. It has already tripled down on MRV. Why? Because it's super important that in this thing you can't see, it is as transparent as possible that is having the impact it has. That, company X fronted by, that's behind a certain other pathway believes in additionality and this idea that it is making an impact on carbon removal above and beyond what the Earth is already doing without human intervention. That they believe in collaboration and sort of multi-stakeholder alliances that reinforce for everyone how there are like best practices and the way that carbon credits are registered and traded. If you think about a world like just in 18 months, where everyone encountering all of these different players within the space, all of these different interesting startups are putting their own technological lens on the same sort of story about what they believe in and why they believe it and why they think that's essential to this new industry, that is a recipe for trust.
Amazing. Okay, I love that. So let's get specifically into your report, even though we've covered a lot of it already, but I want to circle back to the title of Will's report is Facilitating Trust in Novel Carbon Dioxide Removal Through Coordinated Communications. It's a sector analysis and a strategic action plan for the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership and Counteract Partners. And so my next question was basically what are some of the best practices going forward? You've already mentioned a lot of them. You mentioned that it's incumbent upon suppliers to be the face of CDR going forward and to embody trust. And you mentioned a dire need for standardization and coordinated action plan across all sectors.
Yeah.
What are some of the devices? I imagine that it's in places like Carbon Unbound where all the players get together in one room and they say, hey, let's do this. Let's come up with this set of standards. Is that how markets evolve? Is that how you see that happening? Or is it government led? Does a leader need to emerge that's going to sort of take charge of this matter? How can trust be, how can this be brought about?
So trust in any marketplace, and the theory backs this up. Never thought I'd be so deep into trust theory as in this assignment, but trust in any ecosystem, much like trust between two people, depends on the same thing being reinforced from multiple directions, right? It's not just you telling someone something and expecting them to believe it. When you say something, that other side like has other data points that make them believe you. This is why trust in this marketplace is so difficult because it's all new. You know, the unregulated marketplaces in which they're traded, the companies themselves that supply the crediting registries, the ancillary services that feed into it, all of it's developing. And that's not even talking about the regulation of it, which is itself underdeveloped. So on the challenging side, like, yeah, that's a huge challenge, but so is climate change, by the way, and let's look at the positive. The fascinating room for, I think, for reason to be positive about this is that there's been tremendous developments just in the past 6 months alone about a really cross-cutting, like a cross-industry alignment around principles and best practices and standards coming from multiple directions, such that no startup, no small entity in the space of any kind really needs to go on the very difficult journey of like just trying to represent that this is the way they want to do things and please believe me that it's good. There's an astonishing amount of work in multi-stakeholder initiatives like the Integrity Council on the Voluntary Carbon Markets and its core carbon principles. The Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, different thing, that is talking mainly about buyers and how you represent carbon credits and net zero. There are the initiatives of the registries like Isometric and Puro and Carbon Future. And the point is, all of these basically say the same thing. I mean, people on the call are going to dispute that, but in my mind, as a non-expert or as a non-like industry insider, it's astonishing how much overlap there is. From these huge 10,000-foot high multi-stakeholder initiatives down to sort of like quite sector-specific protocols, like the Reykjavik protocol that is only about marine carbon, like ocean stuff. Everyone's saying what we need to do is to be transparent. We need to be really into MRV. We need to make sure everything's measurable, that it's verifiable, that it's guided by the science, and that there's like a panel of scientists agreeing that this is the way that one measures and verifies something, that it is additional, that it's permanent, or that
1,000 years at least.
that the removal is on a time span far longer than human lifetime. Whether that's 1,000 years or 10,000 years doesn't really matter. The point is that it's only a removal if you remove it around the same time scale as the planet warming gases that it's meant to counteract. And so in some senses, this alignment is kind of obvious, like it makes a lot of sense, especially in a marketplace with trust issues, that is the recipe for building trust, but it has not existed until now. And there's various reasons why this has only developed in the past 2 years. But what it means for startups is that they really have a fast emerging infrastructure to clip into or to join, to integrate with, so that when you are telling the market or potential investors or future buyers what you believe in and why your approach to CDR is better than the stuff they may have heard of in the past, what you can say is that you both believe something as a company and that it is also aligned with multiple initiatives at like the low, medium, and high level. And by the way, is very quickly going to be codified in regulation. And that is where, to go back to my original point, you start to have these reinforcing dynamics of trust, right? That there are all these signals that no matter what the words are, all sort of amount to the same thing. We need it to be transparent, measurable, permanent, like real removal, that actually does something more than like trees are doing anyway. We need to just up our game and make everyone see what we're doing. So so I think that is one of the, like, if you could call it like an infrastructural reason, why there's more reason, why there's better hope than there ever has been, that this new wave of CDR solutions will be coming to market at a time where more people can understand what it all has in common, what it stands for, and ultimately trust it.
I love that. That's super well put. Thanks, Will. It's really nice to have that kind of breakdown of what constitutes a trusting relationship as well. I think that stands to be reminded, and that was very well put. And it's so encouraging and heartening to see that the CDR space is evolving that way, and that there's all of this kind of like, I guess, it's the furnishings that are coming into place that are going to make it, hopefully make it more welcoming and more reassuring for both suppliers and buyers. And we all need carbon removal to stick around. We don't want this to be a flash in the pan, and that there's no reason why it should be. And the more it matures, the more it evolves, the more reason that it will actually a long-lasting and truly impactful thing. I want to mention that I read your sector analysis last night. I didn't read it cover to cover, but most of it, and you have very impressive bibliography. So you obviously did a lot of research, and you talked to a lot of industry players and a lot of industry insiders, and most of which are going to be at Carbon Unbound. So thank you, Carbon Unbound, for providing that venue for everyone to meet up in the same room. And I understand that you will be there as well.
I will be, yeah. And
Yeah.
anyone on the call now or that watches this, please, you know my name. Come find me. Yeah.
Great. So talk to me a little bit about how you chose the people to get in touch with. There's a lot of them. And so what was your approach there? Did you want to span all the sectors, or how did you choose who to reach out to?
So like the animating idea in all my research was, what all of these different players have in common? Because a losing strategy in this is for 20 different technologies, none of which anyone's heard of, to, in a small, underfunded way, tell 20 different stories and compete with each other, right? And I think we all know that this incredibly diverse industry has as much or more in common than it has apart. And also that it's the story of the common promise and how you get there that is definitely more interesting to me, and probably if the test of any good story is like whether it interests your cousin or your mother or something, like that's probably the story they want to hear. But so I focused on really trying to understand what all of the different corners of the space on the supply side, like basically all the different subsectors or pathways or methods, what leaders of startups there thought about it. I asked a common set of questions, and I tried to kind of deliberately talk to as wide an array of companies as possible, especially crossing the so-called nature-based versus technological divide. The more I look at this, I think it's an irrelevant distinction, but it's relevant in terms of capturing just how broad everything is. What I discovered from that is that indeed, despite the inevitable disagreements about kind of points of emphasis and so on, there was a lot of agreement across the space. There was also, I might add, like I sort of got the sense that no one had asked the question before, which is fine, but there's no the Carbon Removal Alliance in the US and the Carbon Business Council in the US and Europe are doing great work. But one of the reflections of how new this whole thing is that there's not even any trade association like sort of organizing everyone and giving them, you know, the sort of like messaging sheet like the oil and gas industry does. So it was really interesting because in a lot of these discussions, it seemed to be the first time that these founders of companies that were themselves new had it. There were four common points that came out for me. One was that the majority of founders and sort of other investors and experts I talked to seemed to agree that there was good reason to have a sort of common identity based around common values and common goals and common positioning across the board of novel CDR. That it would, on a practical level, help tell the story, that it was a dotted line between that sort of coordinated storytelling and trust. And it would help all of these different players sort of learn from each other and you know have a sort of have a common identity. There was also as part of that like a really interesting discussion around the role of this sort of common position around protecting from the failure of individual companies and pathways. And I'm trying to think of a quick way to summarize this. It's if in a low information environment where it's very easy to conflate, say, DAC and BECS, and like DAC and BECS and bio oil and biochar. There's an obvious risk that if you've never heard of any of these things and one blows up, or a whole pathway after massive amounts of government funding fails, that there is then like a perception spillover to all the other ones, right? And so there was a really interesting, like a bit of a consensus around this idea that if over the next 1 or 2 years, the startup galaxy aligns around sort of standardization amid diversity, around sort of doing really different things, but having the same approach to it, that could help the public especially understand that there are multiple routes to CDR having a great future, that it doesn't depend on any one of them, and that the other companies and pathways and so on that have a claim to removing carbon from the atmosphere by 2050 on a massive scale are going about things the right way, as other ones that, because of technological issues or whatever, didn't quite get there. So that in a sense was the main finding and sort of why I'm speaking. So I feel like I'm being less academic and more sort of cheerleader about this, but I went into this topic really not knowing the answer, and I sort of still don't, but I'm speaking about my findings confidently because I was surprised the degree to which all the people I talked to and the research I did confirmed or like really indicated that that startups want to be more like part of one thing than a collection of separate things. The other interesting insight was that almost everyone agreed that they needed to be showing and not telling as a means to communicate. And I think that's a super interesting challenge to everyone on this call, especially because, you know, maybe a lot of the initiatives you're part of are like pre-seed or you know, like just ideas for now. For companies that are 1 or 2 stages ahead of that, one common experience they've had, going back to your point of like invisible gas and how do you prove it, is that you need to be able to like show people what is actually happening, and they don't need to be able to like see that it's working, right? But it's really powerful in terms of public perception to see a turbine spinning or to see like the pilot, you know, the sorbent interacting with something, even if you don't know what's happening, and then tell the story that this in a tiny way is actually contributing to the huge planetary goal. And I think that that's a really interesting insight. And sometimes startups, because they're often academic, like sort of get in this laboratory mentality where it's all about sort of proving something behind closed doors and not really sharing the results or like letting the cameras in until the whole thing's perfect. What that's meant, in actual fact, is that the only person who, the only company that in this space that can really show anything is Climeworks, because they're the ones with like a semi-commercial scale facility, and it shouldn't be that way. And it also doesn't need to be the case that you have to have like a massive $500 million facility to show that you're like kind of doing something on the ground. And just very quickly, everyone agreed that measurement reporting and verification was absolutely crucial. This took a lot of different flavors. There were some people, and I'm not going to name names, although if you want to read my paper, please contact me and you'll see who made these points in there. But some people were just saying, we're making like a sort of philosophical point that you can't be expected to believe in anything unless you can show people that it's there. Others were talking more about like the mechanics of how that would work, and whether if there was more cooperation across the industry, you could sort of feed into joint databases where there was sort of one way, almost in real time, to see all the results of these pilot projects. Of course, not necessarily that anyone's going to parse those details. It's just the act itself of making something transparent and in the public domain that helps people see that you are going about things in a transparent way. And then I don't feel like we have the time, but one of the other main points that came out was how many of the interviewees wanted government regulation, and that's something that I think we've all heard, at the various conferences. Is who's the best trust architect? Who is the backstopper of trust in like the monetary system? It's obviously governments, and so for this to scale, yes. A lot of people agreed that regulation, like the sort of draft of the CRCF that was just proposed a couple weeks ago, is super important. I think one really interesting nuance, and on the topic of government regulation, is the degree to which all of these initiatives that I've discussed, these multi-stakeholder initiatives and the voluntary carbon market, the degree of overlap that we're seeing between these incoming regulations and what these self-enforcing rules believe. There's a lot of alignment between the two, which is to say that regulation is good, and that'll certainly, that will maybe help speed things up. But a lot of what regulators are focused on as the principles and practices that matter have already been codified by these overlapping voluntary market initiatives that more and more marketplaces and suppliers are already following. So hopefully what that means is when enough regulation comes, and like, well, anytime really, that it's sort of like it's a smooth handover of the baton, and it's not going to be hugely disruptive to the space.
Okay, so that's good to hear that some of the groundwork's already being laid there. Okay, so this is good. This is where we have a few more minutes, and not to be overly reductive, but I just want to just do a little brief recap, just so that at this point, even though that this is infinitely complex matter, that there is currently a trade deficit. It's incumbent upon industry players to unite and get into reinforcing relationships that will reinforce trust, and that there is, as per Will's last point, there is a lot of that groundwork that has already been done. It's been codified, and it's only a short ways away from perhaps becoming a little bit more official, and thus entering the next phase of market maturation. So, very, very quick question, if you answer this very quickly. Will, how do you define novel CDR? That's one thing that came up, because you refer to the new wave of CDR versus the old wave of CDR. And then we have two questions from the audience, which I'll dip into afterwards. So what is your quick definition of novel CDR?
So super quickly, I challenge everyone to come up with a better word or like catch concept and novel, but I think it's the only one that sort of works because basically novel CDR is talking about almost everything that is not soil carbon and afforestation based. Those pathways account for the vast majority of carbon removal credits traded at the moment. And so what novel encompasses is basically everything that's not forestry related and soil related. That's why it spans everything from enhanced weathering to DAC. And this is important because like the collective newness of all of these new pathways matters more, I think, than the technological differences. What that means and things that like your sister understands is that like carbon removal 2.0, how do we talk about like a collective promise of many different things versus the sort of checkered history of what came before? That's an open question.
Okay, cool. So there's two questions from the audience I'm going to get to. How can you positively address concerns about CDR and specifically direct air capture just being greenwashing to improve a company's image without making a difference?
Ooh, well, it does make a difference. It does make a difference because it actually removes carbon from the atmosphere. Now, to not have it be greenwashing, the DAC project actually has to work. And that is why this isn't just about comms. It is about the safe development of DAC technology that aligns with all of these like agreed principles that we've been talking about, that it's done in a verifiable way, that when project says that the DAC, the carbon captured through DAC and then stored maybe through mineralization, if you say it lasts 10,000 years, you better be able to prove it. If you can prove it, I think it's a pretty simple sell of why that's not greenwashing, because you are, on a ton for ton basis, counteracting the planet warming gases around the same time span that they live in the atmosphere. I have nothing against tree planting projects, but that's just not the case with various routes of forestry-based removal, simply because of how long a tree can keep carbon stored in itself. So
awesome. Okay.
But that
yes.
is a crucial question in the whole piece. It's not just about DAC. It's about if people perceive this whole diverse space as just like a bit of a carbon capture excuse for greenwashing, that's a problem. And you need to work, we would need to work twice as hard and with twice as much transparent information to show people like politely that there's no reason for concern.
Good answer. Last question, because we're on the hour here. So I'm going to get to it quickly. What are your thoughts on the communication and metrics in ESG reports put out by the Big Four companies? Is it helping to instill trust in the CDR space? Are they measuring the right things?
Ooh, so all the ESG metrics, that's a big, no, they're not all measuring the right things. I think a bigger issue is how many people can even interpret those metrics, right? Like talk about trust. The person on the street, these ESG metrics are impenetrable to them, and they only trust them because they trust Deloitte, right? Or if they trust Deloitte. So this is a problem at multiple levels. One is to probably increase public understanding of the basics behind all of these metrics and what they're measuring. And also to have metrics that are sometimes more true, that are more truly addressing the big problem of greenhouse gases, more than the ones used currently, which we don't have time to go into, but are often easily manipulated. A great example of that, just quickly, would be about how the different ways that you could account for carbon removal versus, say, carbon avoidance. And this is a live issue. This is like a $1 billion question in the carbon markets at the moment, right? Should you, under SBTI, be able to apply carbon removals towards your net zero commitments? Theoretically, yes. I mean, why the hell not? It's removing things, isn't it? But it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily fit into the existing accounting schemes. And so how can we make that better? And if we can, how can we help auditors and investors and other stakeholders understand that in terms of reaching net zero, maybe like a high quality, high integrity carbon removal credit is actually qualitatively different and better than a lot of the credits prevailing in the market today.
Very, very important point to end on. There's quality of carbon removals, and some are higher than others, and that is ultimately what's going to build trust in this market space. Will MacNamara, we're a little bit past the hour. I want to be respectful to our audience, but I want to thank you incredibly much for sharing your insight and knowledge with us. It's been terrific. I want to remind everybody that the Open Air's Carbon Removal Challenge we'll be having its showcase at the opening night of Carbon Unbound on May 21st. If you're in New York City in the area, please come on down. There's still some tickets available. 5 teams from across the world are going to be showcasing their technology and hopefully their foray into the carbon dioxide removal space. And there's also going to be a lot of other industry players. It's a great chance to meet and talk with Will, as well as some open air people and other carbon managers, because the more we get into conversation, the more we communicate with another, the more trust we build, and the more chance we have at removing tonnage from the atmosphere. So thanks again, Will MacNamara. It's been terrific. We posted links to your website, and is it okay for people to reach out to you personally?
Yeah, please. I'm at will@gibboncoms.com. Please reach out to me. I would love to meet in New York or London, where I live. And thanks, guys, for having me on. This has been really great to talk about. I genuinely have never spent so much time thinking privately in rooms by myself about a topic. So it's really genuinely cool to share it and just to talk it over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Maybe next year we'll have Gibbons work with us on the Carbon Removal Challenge.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I would love that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now.